everyone.
Morning.
Morning.
It's nice to see all of you today. Many of you were here yesterday too for our BEC class. Okay, it's on. Today is, we honor Shinran Shonin's wife, whose name was Ishini. So we say, okay. So we start by saying Shinran Shonin, the founder of Shin Buddhism, was quite a radical Buddhist. He was the first Buddhist monk to openly marry and to raise a family. And it changed all of Buddhism in Japan. Prior to Shinran Shonin, all Buddhist monks were celibate. They lived a monastic life. But his teacher, Shinran's teacher, Honen, who was also a very revolutionary and radical monk, had left the monastic tradition and was teaching Buddhism to the everyday person. Before, only monks could learn about Buddhism, and that was in the monasteries. In the Kyoto area, there's a monastery on a mountain called Mount Hiei. To this day, if you visit Japan, you can visit Mount Hiei, and some of those ancient temples and monasteries are still there, and there are still monks practicing that school of Buddhism, which is called Tendai Buddhism. So Honen and Shinran both studied and practiced on Mount Hiei, but they also both left Mount Hiei. First, Honen left, and then Shinran was still practicing and becoming very frustrated with his practice, not able to sort of achieve enlightenment through the monastic path. And then he kept hearing about this radical monk by the name of Honen, and so I think finally he got up the nerve, the courage to go see Honen. And when he met Honen, he met his true teacher of life. And so then he left the monastic Tendai Buddhist tradition, began to follow Honen. And Honen was teaching Nembutsu, Namu Amida Butsu. And although Honen himself lived a monastic life, he was telling his followers, you should live your life in the manner that enables you to live the life of the Nembutsu. So if it's easier for you to live a life of Nembutsu, being married and have a family, that's fine, go ahead. See, for Shinran Shonin to have been told by someone who he reveres and respects, saying, it's okay to get married. I mean, he must have been doing cartwheels across the floor or across the room. After 20 years of being a monk, strict celibate life, and his revered teacher, learned monk, said, no, I don't think it's necessary to be a monk to live a life of Buddhism. If you choose to be a monk, that's fine, but it's not an absolute necessity. If you want to get married, go ahead and get married. So Shinran Shonin married, and his wife, her name was Ishini-sama, and they raised 6 children. So Shinran Shonin experienced all of the joys and also sorrows of having a family and being married. He had a very wonderful relationship with his wife. They each looked at each other as I think the next one is So they each regarded each other as bodhisattvas. They each regarded each other as bodhisattvas of compassion, or kannon. So Shinran Shonin looked at his wife Eshini as a bodhisattva of compassion. Eshini-sama, in her own heart and mind, looked at her husband Shinran Shonin as a bodhisattva of compassion. I once mentioned this at a talk at another temple, and it was more of a discussion format, and right away this lady raised her hand. She said, well, Sensei, if I was married to Shinran Shonin, I could look at him as a bodhisattva of compassion, but not my husband. I could never look at my husband as a bodhisattva of compassion. So we kind of laughed. But then I thought about it, and I responded to this lady. I said, well, Eshini-sama's ability, or how she sees her husband Shinran Shonin as a bodhisattva of compassion, it's not just talking about the greatness of Shinran Shonin. Only someone who is humble is able to look at someone as a bodhisattva of compassion. So Eshini-sama was a truly humble person. That's why she was able to see her husband as a bodhisattva. Shinran Shonin was a truly humble person. That's why he was able to look at his wife as a bodhisattva. So it's not just talking about the greatness of the other person, it's talking about the humbleness of that individual that enables them to see their spouse as a bodhisattva of compassion. So they each regarded each other as bodhisattvas of compassion. So we'll go to the next one. So today we chanted the Nembutsu Wasan, and just kind of coincidentally we sang the gatha that is about also the same wasan. So I want to focus this morning about one particular wasan out of the 6 that we chanted. Let's see. So let's go to the next slide. So the wasan are poems in Japanese, written in Japanese by Shinran Shonin. So Shinran Shonin had many writings. We have a big, thick book called The Collected Works of Shinran. It's in Temple Library. We also have copies for sale. And so it has all of Shinran Shonin's writings. So some of his writings he wrote in Chinese, because that's what learned monks, the way they wrote at that time. All learned monks wrote in Chinese. So his main work, called the Kyogyo Shinsho, he wrote in Chinese because he wanted other learned monks to read it and understand it. But he also wrote poems in Japanese that the average person then would be able to read and understand. Now prior to Shinran Shonin, this was not done. Learned monks kept the study of Buddhism within themselves. So Honen and Shinran were beginning to share the Dharma with the everyday person. So he wrote many, many short poems called wasans in Japanese. So normally we chant the Shoshinge, which was written by Shinran Shonin, and then after that we chant the Nembutsu Wasan, which we chanted today. But altogether it's a little bit long. It's about 25-30 minutes to chant it all. So that's why I initiated doing just one or the other. So sometimes even at Orange County or here, we just do Shoshinge, and another Sunday we'll do the Nembutsu Wasan. So sometimes maybe we'll do both of them together for a special service, like maybe Shinran Shonin's memorial. So we just did the Nembutsu Wasan this morning. Go ahead. So if you turn in your service book to page 76, that's where we chanted. And then page 82, it has an English translation of the 6 wasans that we chanted, the Nembutsu Wasan. Okay, and then if you turn to page 126 and 127, the gatha that we just sang, see, that's the first 3 wasans. Okay, And so we sang verse 2 and 3. Verse 2 and 3, the light of wisdom exceeds all measure. And so turn back to page 82, the second one, the light of wisdom exceeds all measure. Okay, so, but this gatha takes Shinran Shonin's wasan, but someone, I guess this Osamu Hidaka, put it to kind of Western music. Okay, but what we chanted, the Nembutsu wasan, earlier, that melody goes back to Buddhism in China over 1,200 years ago. The melody. So it goes back to the Buddhist monks that chanted, and then so that melody and that style of chanting came to Japan, and Shin Buddhists adopted that melody into our chanting liturgy. So imagine 1,200 years. So it's been on the Buddhist top 40 for 1,200 years. Let's see Justin Bieber or Taylor Swift try to top that, you know. See their songs 1,200 years from now. Not likely. So we'll come back to this English translation after a bit. Let's go to the next one. So this first, well maybe, the very first wasan, it starts out, Amida has passed through 10 kalpas now since realizing Buddhahood. So actually, all 6 of these wasans are talking about the light of Amida Buddha, the light of Amida Buddha. So first I have to talk about what is Amida Buddha. So sometimes you might be a little confused because sometimes we talk about Amida Buddha and then sometimes we talk about Shakyamuni Buddha. So you don't have to think of them as two absolutely separate things, okay? So I want to try to explain a little bit about Shakyamuni and Amida and the subtle difference between the two. So next slide. So we all know Shakyamuni Buddha as the historical Buddha. Buddhism begins with Shakyamuni Buddha in ancient India. So he's the historical Buddha. Next slide. So Amida Buddha is, you can look at Amida Buddha as the very heart of Shakyamuni Buddha, the essence of Shakyamuni Buddha. Shakyamuni Buddha is a historical person awakened to this truth of enlightenment. But that truth of enlightenment is a timeless truth that he awakened to. And so Amida Buddha is the timeless Buddha, the essence or heart of Shakyamuni Buddha himself, but in a very expanded view. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So we learn about Amida Buddha through Shakyamuni Buddha, who expresses his innermost heart by telling a story in one of the sutras. So the sutras are the Dharma talks or sermons of the Buddha, and on one particular occasion, he told a story. The Buddha often told stories to explain the Dharma to his followers. We all like to listen to stories. It's much easier to digest a message if there's a story. So, stories are timeless, like Star Wars or Harry Potter or The Wizard of Oz, you know. They all captivate us. So who's the hero of Star Wars? Some of the children? Luke Skywalker, right? We all know the hero in some of these movies or stories. So in the larger sutra, the hero of the story is, so so stories have a hero, and stories have a sort of timeless message. So myth or stories can go on for centuries and centuries. So the story in the larger sutra has been inspiring and resonating with Buddhists for nearly 2,000 years. Let's go to the next slide. So in this larger sutra, Shakyamuni Buddha tells us this timeless story about a bodhisattva who becomes a Buddha named Amida. So Shakyamuni Buddha says, once upon a time, there was a king, and this king encountered a Buddha And when he encountered this Buddha, he was so inspired that he decided to give up being a king and to become a truth seeker, to become a Buddha himself. And he took upon himself this name, Amida. So Shakyamuni Buddha is telling us his own innermost heart, but not saying, oh, Shakyamuni Buddha, I thought this, I thought that, I did this, I did that. He's telling us his innermost heart through this character, the hero of the story of Amida Buddha. Okay? So that's a subtle difference between Amida Buddha and Shakyamuni Buddha. If their hearts are the same, Amida Buddha is the real essence of Shakyamuni Buddha's heart. Amida Buddha is the timeless Buddha. Okay, let's go to the next one. So Shinran Shonin, he, in his writings and in his own life, respected and revered Amida Buddha, the timeless Buddha. Of course, he also revered Shakyamuni Buddha, the historical Buddha, but he saw the real essence as the timeless Buddha. So these 6 wasans are all poems praising Amida Buddha, or the timeless Buddha. So the one I want to focus on is the second one, the second wasan, that talks about this light of wisdom, Chie no Komyo in Japanese. So Shinran Shonin is praising the qualities of Amida Buddha, which are light, and the qualities of this light. Okay. So this light of wisdom, as the wasan says, exceeds all measure. So something is immeasurable. So if I were to say to some of you after service today, drive down to the Pacific Ocean and take a bucket and please measure for me how much water is in the Pacific Ocean, you go, are you crazy? It's beyond measure. Or if I were to say, tonight, try to count how many stars there are in the sky, that would be an impossible task. It's beyond measure. So that's what Shinran Shonin is saying in this poem. This light of wisdom, the light of the Buddha, is beyond measure. You cannot measure the brilliance. You cannot measure the value of it. You cannot measure the brightness, the power of this light. So it's the light of wisdom. So we have to understand the difference between wisdom and intelligence, because sometimes we get the two confused. So intelligence, or being smart, means you know lots of things. You're very good in math, or you're very good in science, or very good in history, to know some subject matter. You could even have intelligence in Buddhism, knowing a lot about Buddhism, facts and history and things like that. That's what intelligence is. Wisdom, on the contrary, means you know yourself very deeply. Socrates says, know thyself. Dogen was a great Zen Buddhist master who lived around the same time as Shinran Shonin. Dogen says to study Buddhism is to study the self. Dogen said, well, actually, you don't really need a lot of books to study Buddhism. You just have to reflect on and study the self. So someone who truly knows themselves, their ego self becomes small, but their true self becomes vast, huge. Next slide. But someone who doesn't know themselves, their ego self is huge, and their true self is very small. So the big difference between wisdom and intelligence. Someone who has touched on wisdom has a small ego self, but a huge true self that is able to be one with all beings and all of life. Okay? So this light of wisdom exceeds all measure, and every finite living being receives this illumination that is like the dawn. So this is Shinran Shonin's poem. So he sees this light of the Buddha, the light of Amida Buddha, as immeasurable, reaches everywhere, and illuminates all beings, like the dawn of light coming over the mountains illuminating the whole earth. Okay. Once again, Shinran Shonin sees this light of wisdom everywhere. All beings are illuminated by this light of wisdom. I think that's the. Oh, so then the last line says, so take refuge in Amida, the true and real light. So Amida is not a being, like a godlike being, but Amida is this light of wisdom, the light of the Dharma. And so we come to service like this every Sunday, and we listen to the Dharma, and in listening to the Dharma, we come to receive, we come to encounter this light of wisdom in our life. So we, through listening, our hearts and minds come to receive the teachings. And in receiving the teachings, the darkness of our heart and mind is transformed, and our hearts and minds are illuminated. And it might take some time, it might take years, but over the course of a lifetime of listening, our hearts and minds are transformed. Our ego self that was huge is now reduced in size, and a true self becomes great. So that's what I think this poem is talking about. So if you could open your books again to page 82. So let's read together all 6 of the wasan that we chanted earlier. So these are the first 6. When we chant Nembutsu wasan, this is what we are chanting. Okay? So we'll just read it out loud together from the stanza 1. Amida has passed through 10 kalpas now, since realizing Buddhahood. Dharma body's wheel of light is without bound, shining on the blind and ignorant of the world. The light of wisdom exceeds all measure, and every finite living being receives this illumination that is like the dawn. So take refuge in Amida, the true and real light. The liberating wheel of light is without bound. Each person it touches, it is taught, is free from attachments to being and non-being. So take refuge in Amida, the enlightenment of non-discrimination. The cloud of light is unhindered, like open sky. There is nothing that impedes it. Every being is nurtured by this light. So take refuge in Amida, the one beyond conception. The light of purity is without comparing. When a person encounters this light, all bonds of karma fall away. So take refuge in Amida, the ultimate shelter. The Buddha's light is supreme in radiance. Thus Amida is called Buddha, Lord of blazing light. It dispels the darkness of the 3 courses of affliction. So take refuge in Amida, the great one worthy of offerings. So just to explain a few terms, that stanza number 1, Amida has passed through 10 kalpas. A kalpa means eons and eons of time. So figuratively, this is just saying from the timeless past, Amida has become a Buddha. Meaning this timeless truth of enlightenment is from our beginningless past. And then shining on the blind and ignorant of the world, that's you and I. Blind and ignorant means all unenlightened sentient beings. So just to explain a few of the terms. So this light of Amida, the light, the truth of enlightenment, the light of the Dharma, illuminates all beings, shines everywhere. When we come to listen to the Dharma, we will come to receive and be able to see and encounter this light in our own everyday life. It might come from your pet cat or dog. You might touch this light in a radiant flower. You might touch this light in seeing a child do something kind to another child. Throughout our life, we can encounter this light, but we have to be nurtured in the teachings first to be able to see it. I've shared this example before, but I'll close with this one true story from my good friend and colleague, Reverend David Matsumoto. Reverend David Matsumoto, he became a Buddhist because he met his first wife, who was a Shin Buddhist. He was not a Buddhist. When he met his wife, she had already had cancer. She had cancer since she was 16 years of age. When they got married, she was barely strong enough to make it through the wedding ceremony. She lived another 2 years after they were married. But she was the love of his life. And when she died of cancer, he was quite at a great loss. And he was very despondent. He was walking along a trail in his sort of sadness and despondency. And he just sat on this trail. He was so sad, kind of sobbing in tears, because he had lost the love of his life. But as he sat there on the trail, he looked right in front of him, and there was a wildflower blooming. And he began to gaze and stare at this wildflower. And the wildflower began to speak to him, not in actual words, but he heard a message from this wildflower. The wildflower said to him, "I am alive. I am alive. You too can live. You too can live." And he kind of received immeasurable light and life, which is Amida, from this wildflower. And he stood up, moved forward with his life, entered the path of Buddhism, studied it, and now is one of our eminent scholars of Shin Buddhism. So you never know. You never know where you might encounter this light of Amida, the light of wisdom.